Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this session. My name is Graeme Payne, and I'm one of the partners at Bird & Bird. And for those of you that were in the track one introduction, I co-head our global retail and consumer sector, of which wellness is a huge and very important part. When I'm not kissing babies or opening supermarkets, I am a dyed-in-the-wool franchise and distribution lawyer. As a result, I don't get invited to many parties. But actually, this is a growth model and well-trodden strategy for a number of businesses, both in this sector and outside. And therefore, the main theme for this afternoon is franchising one of the most dynamic business growth models and opportunities for this sector. I'm going to introduce my three panelists in a second. You're also aware that with the other tracks and some of the other sessions going on today, we've got Bird & Bird colleagues and others talking about intellectual property and brand protection and brand reputation. We will touch on that theme during the course of this afternoon's talk, but this is not intended to be a deep dive into intellectual property. That's going on elsewhere. And of course, one of the other tracks is about corporate investment and corporate growth, which sometimes is the alternative or perhaps parallel growth track to a franchise model. Okay, so my three panelists this afternoon, I have Michele from Fierce Grace, Lawrence from Sumo Salad, and Michael from F45. Going to start with ladies first. Michele, would you mind introducing yourself, your business, and how long you've been involved in franchising? And then I'll hand it over to Lawrence, then Michael.
Stop me if I go on too long. Yes, I'm Michele from Fierce Grace. It's a yoga brand, and it's we relaunched. It's a long story. I was Bikram at first. I brought hot yoga to Europe in 1994. And basically was just a yoga teacher, and I started teaching that, and that grew into 4 studios, big studios in London. And during that time I was developing a yoga system that I wanted to teach, and so did the difficult thing of converting 4 established businesses over to my new brand. So that was in 2013, and we've been going since then, and our franchise business has just sort of grown organically, so without us really looking at first. So that was, from 2013.
Okay, Lawrence?
Hi, hello everyone.
Yeah.
Hello everyone, I'm Lawrence. So I'm Chief Customer Officer for Sumo Salad. So I'm based in Sydney in Australia. For those of you who aren't familiar with Sumo Salad, the brand started life 15 years ago as a healthy alternative within one single channel food courts. And over the probably next 9 years, it grew to being a $90 million business. So it's a household name within Australia, and there are some outposts outside of that. I joined only 2.5 years ago as Chief Customer Officer. I was previously based here in the UK. And over the last 2.5 years, we've been pivoting the business to focus on other channels and really leverage that. The business grew completely through franchise. And so my experience of franchise is really over the last 2.5 years, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of those do's and don'ts with you.
And finally, Michael.
My name's Mike Dean. Good afternoon to everyone. I work with F45. We are currently the fastest growing fitness franchise in the world. We've got just shy of 1,700 sites in about 42 different countries, mainly across North America. However, UK expansion is something which essentially is my role. I've been with F45 for just shy of 2 years. I actually went on and trained in Sydney before we'd even launched in the UK, fell in love with the brand and pestered them enough until they gave me a role, essentially. I've now been heading up sales here for just over a year, and looking forward to speaking to you all.
Great. Just before we dive into some of the questions, how many other franchise businesses or businesses that use franchising do we have in the room? Can we have a quick show of hands? Okay. And then how many of you are considering franchising? Okay. Excellent. Right, so can we keep this positive? Michael, can I start with you? Two limbs to this question, and I appreciate that you're relatively new to F45, but why do you think F45 chose franchising, and what do you think the advantage is that franchising has brought to F45? And then I'll hand it to Michele and Lawrence.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that F45 was launched in 2013, and from site 1 to site 2, it was decided that it was going to be a franchise model. So every process along the line that could be streamlined and everything that could be done to essentially fast track that has happened. So we're not taking a model which is pre-existing and kind of manipulating it out of shape. With that, and really the main reason to F45 going down the franchising route is just scale, and the ability to be able to grow as quickly as we have. I mean, since 2013, as I said earlier, we're up to almost 1,700 units. In the UK, we've gone from a standing start 2 years ago to selling 60, which you look at other fitness concepts is hugely above their growth. And again, I think that the reason that they've done it is because of speed of growth, and how that they've done it is just making the process as easy as possible from the get-go. So it's very plug and play. Everything that could be streamlined and made simple has been, and it's really down for the franchisee to get the site, and then for us to actually get the business up and running with them.
Okay. Now, Lawrence, franchising has traditionally been the preserve of the other sector that's running on the other floor, which is our badness sector, and fast food and pizzas. Why franchising for a salad concept?
I mean, it's a very similar answer. I mean, we started by doing corporate stores, but then to get to the level of scale, so we have 70 stores around Australia, and to become a household brand, franchising was the preferred model. So it's helped us get to that point.
Okay. Then Michele, any other adds to that?
Well, we started in a slightly different way in that we got approached before we were completely ready to people go, oh, we want to open, a Fierce Grace. So because I'd been running those businesses for 17 years as a different kind of yoga, I already had manuals that I'd been helping other people with, friends around in the industry. So I had most of it, but we weren't quite ready. And actually my first franchise request was before I'd even launched somebody got wind of it and like, we want to do it. And you have to wait for me to actually do my first one. So we've kind of grown along with it. So we were quite lucky that it started very slowly and we just grew with it and improved all our manuals and procedures. And then I brought on board a franchise guru who's actually sitting right there, Mark Lemon, and he helped us get everything in place because it was just at that point just really me as the owner. And when somebody takes your franchise, I'm sure a lot of you know this, the responsibility that you feel is so enormous. You don't sleep at night if you think you're not supporting them enough. And in that sense, it was a bit more organic for us. We just could kind of learn from our mistakes and then just keep getting better and better until I think we're in 26 businesses now, 26 locations.
And joking aside, we are going to come on in a couple of questions' time to mistakes made that the panel are happy to share, because actually I think when I spoke with a couple of them earlier this week, actually, believe it or not, the businesses benefit more from the mistakes they've made. That's not just a trite saying, it's very true. So in a moment we'll move to mistakes made and lessons learned. Lawrence, if I could perhaps start with you this time. Still a relatively young franchise business, and we'll also talk later about the pivot that you've alluded to. What would you say are some of the negatives or disadvantages you've seen from your franchise journey?
So I think the key thing to understand is that you've developed an IP, a methodology, a process to actually deliver an end-to-end customer experience. The disadvantage is you're handing that over to someone else and you're giving responsibilities to someone else to champion your vision. Mm-hmm. So it's like handing over your child in some ways, because you need to make sure that the experience is really consistent. And in the food industry in particular, there's a lot of heavy lifting involved, a huge amount of heavy lifting, and we look for franchisees who have a particular profile, so an affinity with the market, for example, because we're selling healthy food, so having a purpose bigger than just the product. At the same time, making sure that the franchisees really understand what they're getting into, because the day looks like the day looks in a particular way, because it starts early and finishes late, and they have to do that work, or at least oversee that work. So the downsides are, probably the biggest downside is not doing your due diligence on the partner, because ultimately you'll get it. It's a marriage. That's the way to think about it. So you wouldn't just marry someone without doing your due diligence, or you might do, but it could end in
Expensive.
expensive, and it's exactly the same with the franchisees. If you pick the wrong person, you don't do your due diligence, then you end up spending a lot of wasted energy, which we've done, trying to correct that situation. So that's probably the number one thing. And I would add to that is, we've done this work, get very, very clear on your ideal franchise partner. Yep. So you've done the brand, you know what it looks like, you know what the end-to-end experience you want to create, right from if we have retail stores, we have digital products, right from when someone walks into the store, what they see in terms of the experience, what service they get, what the actual food looks like, what it tastes like. All of those things need to be really understood and documented. And just picking up on the point that you made, probably the biggest risk is when you're in too much of a hurry to franchise. That's when the mistakes come in, because it's like, oh golly, the market's growing, I've got to rush with it, and people come to you and you say, yeah, let's do that. That's when red flag should be in sight. So I would say play the long game, because it's a partnership, and make sure that the partners you're getting into are people you want to work with, people you want to support, because just like you said, these are partners. These people are going to give you money. They're going to give you your, they're going to trust you. And also recognize, I would say the other big learning is recognize the profile of a franchisee. So in our world, franchisees are not typical entrepreneurs. That's why they buy a franchisee. They don't want to create their own IP. And there is an expectation that they're buying a methodology, a business in a box. So you need to really make sure that they are aware of what that looks like, and so whatever process you go through to just make sure that it's right from both parties, then that will lead to successful growth. And certainly when I look at our franchisees, and we have a lot of them in the network, the most successful ones tick a number of boxes which can allow us to replicate that, and alarm bells ring when franchisees, prospective franchisees come to us requesting a franchise, but do not tick all the boxes.
Okay. We'll perhaps return to that really important topic of franchisee profiling in due course. Michele, disadvantages that you've seen in the model, and or any comments on that sort of franchisee profiling, franchisee key criteria?
Yes, I think when it goes abroad to a country where you don't speak the language very well, we got into a problem there. Somebody can seem to tick all the boxes, and then you know that the language is a problem, and I didn't speak the language very well, and you get all the right sounds from them, that they're following your procedures and everything seems okay, but then actually they aren't really, because they didn't understand them quite well enough, and you can't, even though you have it translated, it's not, it doesn't always. So that's something we ran into, and then luckily we realized, oh dear, they haven't done that, and they haven't done that, so we went there. But you do, as you say, Lawrence, it's a lot of time and a lot of effort, and to try and pull something back after it's taken a wrong turn. But that was really the only time we've ever had, and now that's completely fine. We've sorted it all out. But yeah, language and expanding to other countries is quite. It's a little bit fraught if the language isn't the same.
We'll come back to international expansion and the advantages and pitfalls, shall we say. For F45, you've obviously touched on phenomenal growth, and this model has enabled you to scale, as is true with the other businesses. Just changing the question slightly, have you got an actual black and white checklist for what criteria your franchisees should meet, and have you deviated from those?
Good question. From our perspective, it's not quite so you need to tick this box, you need to tick that box. I think there's definitely an element of that, when it comes to buying into the business from the start. Funding is a must. If you haven't got the cash, it's not going anywhere. And there's other various kind of more simplistic things you need to check off. But in terms of the actual business, it's very people-facing, and there's a lot of dealing with members, clients, day to day. And I think judging someone's character and how that they're going to be able to showcase your brand to those people is quite important. And it's often difficult to put a checklist around someone's personality without being very rude anyway. So the idea is really to make sure that they're not only sold into our concept, but we're also sold into them.
Then for all three of you, typically, and this, these style questions are helpful and unhelpful, so apologies. What would you say, Lawrence, we'll start with you, typical period for recruiting a successful franchisee from first contact through to signing the franchise agreement? What would you say?
So if it's very first contact, like you have no previous relationship or experience, well, I mean, you can do it as quickly as you wish, but just bearing in mind my previous comments, that speed of recruitment isn't the thing to measure. I would say recruit slow and make sure you get it right. So you can do, because the actual recruitment process is pretty fast. Setting up a store, onboarding, and providing all that support, that's all there, because with the franchise model, there's a whole load of checklists and there's a whole load of back-end process that's in place to make sure that's in place. So I would say a 3-month period. It depends if there's a site. There's a number of things there, but if there's a franchisee and the site and it's all ready to go, then I would say a 3-month period is probably the right amount of time to actually budget. I wouldn't rush. I think I've made that point.
No. I mean, that is sage advice in terms of taking your time over this. And the earlier comment, this is the long term. It's a long-term project. There are a number of systems that use this as a quick win to get cash and scale, but certainly the wrong way to do it. It keeps our litigation team happy, absolutely fine, but certainly not the right way to build a good business. Michele, would 3 months seem right for you, longer for you? Any other thoughts on that process?
I mean, I think Lawrence has put it really well. It does depend if sometimes people come to you, they go, I've found a great building in my city, I want to do a yoga studio, or whether they're just kind of want to get a feel for who you are and, chat and do business plans. And Mark, my franchise manager and guru, does do all of that. He makes sure that the funding has to be in place. They have to have some sort of business experience, seem to have their head on screwed on quite well, because it is your baby. It is something that they can damage if it's not going to go well. So yes, at first I was so flattered if anyone said, I almost, was like, oh my God, I can't even believe you. What? Yes, of course you can. And luckily there were people that knew me and had been coming to the studios, or one of them was my teacher, and it went very well. But since then, I've got a bit more serious about it, and you do have to choose carefully. But yeah, it takes a long time to build a yoga studio, to find a lease, to find a premises. That can take 6 months to a year. And then the build is 3 months. So the actual building part takes ages. But finding someone that you think, actually, they would be amazing and they really get the brand. For me, it's do they get who we are? Do they get what we're about? That's a really important thing, regardless of business experience. That's more important, I think.
Okay. Mike, anything from F45's side?
I think something that you both touched on. For us, the most time-consuming piece in the process is finding the site, and I think anyone in this room who's tried to set up some sort of studio or some sort of concept, especially in London, understands the demand and understands that, for a particular license, it's almost like gold dust. So in terms of the overall timeline, that's definitely the most time-consuming piece and something that needs to be budgeted in.
Okay. We mentioned earlier that actually a lot of businesses benefit from the mistakes they've made. And when I first met Michele, as soon as she realised I was a lawyer, she tried to excuse herself from talking to me, which happens quite a lot. But this was this was a rarity in my 19 years of doing this, when she said, oh fuck, I think I've parked my car somewhere illegally, I'm going to get fined. I thought, well, I don't do that sort of work. But when she finally did agree to speak to me, I said, well, would you mind talking about some of the mistakes you've made and the lessons learned? And she said, I could do a 5-hour monologue on that. I said, well, we've got 40 minutes. Mistakes made and lessons learned?
Well, without putting anyone off, I would say spend some money on really good contracts. Spend some money on some really good legal advice before you start. I kind of, the first person was like, oh, I'll just get my friends to do a contract sort of a thing. And now, it all works out in the end, but you just want your brand to be in safe hands and be able to protect it if you need to. If somebody, like we had one franchisee take my logo and print it on an Oyster card, for example, and I was like, that's not really, you know what I mean? It's like you don't really want your logo printed on things that you don't want it printed on. So just make sure you protected yourself and good legal advice, amazing. And also really good contracts just for your staff and for, just make sure everything's all done before you recruit or give your brand to somebody.
And then, Mike, from F45 side, whether it's been in your tenure or as the business has grown, any mistakes you've seen the business make?
I think, which is something I know you mentioned we're going to come on to later in terms of vetting potential partners, is definitely they were a product of their own success. Before I was involved, especially in Australia, the brand literally took off and was going like this, which is great. Started a lot of sites, but that whirlwind you get caught up in selling different studios and partnering with different people, you might necessarily miss things such as vetting your potential partners. And I think that was, I wouldn't say it definitely happened, but it was definitely certain areas where that could have happened in the early days, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Lawrence, anything that you care to comment on publicly?
Just because we talk a lot about mistakes, so franchising, in my view, is a fantastic channel to have a lot of advocates when it works well, who are in the market, who are championing your brand, and that's how we've got a brand that is a household name. I think a couple of mistakes. One is, because right now we're franchising within a different context. We're working in partnership with supermarkets, and the model's not yet perfected, and therefore, mistake one is not franchising until the model is perfected. And mistake two is making sure you're resourced as a franchisor to support the franchisees. Because if you grow too fast and you've got too many stores, the resources required, there's a big focus on training, there's a big focus on marketing. That's the expectation, that's in the contract, completely agree. You need to have a very clear contract in terms of what your responsibility is as a franchisor and what the franchisee's role is. But if you're not resourced to support them, then that's when things can go wrong. We're a fresh food business, which means our big fear is that there's going to be some food safety issue. We've had a few challenges in the past, fortunately not many, but we need to make sure that operationally we're able to support franchisees, make sure there are no risks to the brand, because something like that could kill the brand no matter how big you are. So make sure you're resourced and you can operate and you can scale at a pace that you're comfortable with, because that's one thing I often see is that people love the franchise and get very excited, but are not yet ready to actually support them, and that's when it can all go horribly wrong.
I think one of the things I've seen, and Mike, this isn't referring to you, a previous well-known fitness gym chain, when they went international, found a franchise partner. I'm not sure how much due diligence they did or probably didn't do on the partner, but they actually gave this partner exclusivity to 27 countries in one agreement, and this was a pretty blue chip, well-known, well-resourced company. And whilst that is probably one of the extremes I've ever seen, what actually happened was the partner partly developed one of those markets, and then the brand was locked out of the other 26. And it was a 10-year agreement, so you can see some of the mistakes that can be easily made. And that is something often at the start of a franchise business growth journey, whether it's just in the UK or just in its domestic market, there can be a temptation to give far too much away at the beginning. So, a takeaway is really think about what it is you are giving, and any partner that promises they'll deliver the earth, divide it by at least 27. Okay, the next area I wanted to move to, I've put in my notes, is called Stand Still and Die, but that sounds slightly dramatic. We're all seeing the impact of online, particularly in food, even in fitness, and how that's changing. You'll hear business talk about reserving certain channels or routes to markets for themselves. And then, if we were having this conversation 4 or 5 years ago, Deliveroo, Just Eat just didn't exist. So that there is so much disruption. Both Lawrence and Michele earlier this week were telling me about the change in their business model that they have gone through. So, Lawrence, do you want to pick up on how there's been that pivot within the business and the model shift?
Sure. So as I said right at the start, Sumo grew to be in a $90 million business by opening restaurants. So, for example, who has been to Sydney? Okay, so we have a store in the airport, and that gives us really good brand awareness, and we've replicated that model, and that's gone really well, and was going well until the market changed. And of course, it's easy to think that when you're growing, it's just going to continue growing. You can open more stores and more stores, and then that's when things start to go wrong. And certainly, we saw the issues, or Luke, who founded the business, did a few years ago. That's why I came into the business. And what we've been doing over the last 2.5 years has been pivoting. So really understanding what the next business model is. So it's been a lot of hard work, I have to say. Very exciting but challenging period. So where we are now is. We have an omni-channel business. So we still have the franchise store business, but what we've launched are a whole range of ready meals, really to speak to the customer, because that's what we bring as a franchisor. We're an innovation and marketing organization, and we have to continue to innovate and think about the customer and where the customer's going, where the wellness customer is going. And what we found, and this is no surprise to everyone, is that convenience is the number one driver. So how can you actually package convenience and health in the world that we live in today? And that's why we've launched a whole range of healthy ready meals, really focused on good quality ingredients that are now available through some of the supermarkets in Australia. So we've learned a whole new business, really, because we're now an FMCG business, as well as having a chain of restaurants. So it's been a very steep learning curve. A lot of sleepless nights, if you like. But now, of course, we're in those partnerships with the supermarkets, and we've also acquired another brand which has a direct-to-consumer platform. So we have that distribution as well, which is really exciting. So that's where we are now as a business. We're an omni-channel business with a brand, Sumo Salad, which in Australia means fresh and healthy. And that's very, very hard to build, because we do a lot of surveys, we speak to a lot of our customers, but we have the trust of the consumer that the ingredients are really good, and they can trust us. You know what it's like when people, when wellness is a trend, often products come to market that are not exactly healthy, and that's not what we're about. We've our ready-made meals brand is called Sumo Well. And it's a completely different offering, but it has the same core values as the mother brand, if you like, Sumo Salad. And those meals are not yet available through our franchise stores, but will be. So we're building the distribution. It's really good for our brand awareness, because suddenly we're in Coles, and that has Coles is like Tesco, I guess, here. Yeah, sorry.
Coles level is what? Premium? Not really.
No, it's not premium. They have a premium brand now.
Maybe a Tesco's then.
Yes.
Yeah.
And with that pivot, one thing would be interesting: how have you got the franchisees on board with that? Because obviously, where they perhaps started in the business is not now where the business is going.
Yeah, we've got them on board by communicating the vision when we meet with them. So we have a franchise advisory committee. So we're telling them what the strategy is, but To be honest, they very much care about franchisees. Our franchisees are very much, it's a retail business, so they very much care about what's happening today. And they also worry about potential competition to them. Is there going to be, if we're in a big supermarket, does that mean that they're going to lose customers? So it's really thinking through those objections and reassuring them that we have their back, and we want to help them develop their business and grow their business. And overall, it's gone very, very positively with the franchise partner network.
Great. Michele, anything on the sort of pivot you've gone through in your business?
Yes. Now that we have got everything, in a row for the franchisees that we do have, we're in a position now to actually sort of advertise that we do it, because, as I said, it was just sort of organic up until now. So that would probably be the next step to be able to expand a little bit faster in that area. Our business, because it's a yoga system of classes, and my brief to myself when I designed it was to open yoga to a much wider audience. That tends to be the older audience because youngsters already go. So it's key that our teachers are the best trained teachers in all kinds of injury modification and safety. So that side of the business is growing. So we have the customer base, that's one side of it, and now the actual teacher support, teacher training, graduate trainings, and to try to, because I think the industry really, for it to grow, it must have, the teachers have to be better. They just have to be more skilled and more able to deal with older people injured, and injuries is one of our strengths. So we've got programs now for injury training, and that we're going to televise those and do with videos, sort of series of, graduate courses and things like that. So that side is growing more. Mm-hmm. Clothing line, not a yoga, but something a bit more edgy, something a little bit less yoga-y on the horizon. And then we'll eventually get all our classes and workshops and courses online.
Fantastic. And that's a wonderful segue into what I wanted to ask next. Now, Mike, if I can ask you to go first. Training is key to a franchise model. Can you share sort of F45's sort of initial training and then ongoing training and support for its franchisees and what that looks like?
Yeah, definitely. I think firstly, from our perspective, the ideal franchisee, even though we don't live in an ideal world, is someone that's come through the ranks from a member and knows the process, understands what we are and understands our offering, and then gets to the point where, this is interesting enough to set up their own studio. That's ideal for us because they know how we work, they understand our culture, and definitely the kind of social element to our business. In terms of if we were taking someone, I guess, green and bringing them all the way through, there's a fair bit we do before contracts are signed or anything like that. They must come in and do a class, or at least observe one. They must have a certain amount of face-to-face. I would expect them to be speaking to franchisees, etc. Yep. Once they're actually onboarded and into the process, we run a week's training, which takes you through everything from what you should be doing before the doors are opened, all the way through to what you should be doing 12 months after they're opened. And that's marketing, sales, etc. Ongoing, from a HQ perspective, our largest division is support. Yeah. And that's really where we focus. And it's very much in terms of once the studio is set up, core to this is a problem, but we're going to be constantly there feeding you new information. So we've got a HQ based here in London, which covers every kind of support you can imagine, technology, physical support, etc. So 24-hour phone line. We've also got what we call studio performance managers, and they're pretty crucial because they will actually go into studios, sometimes kind of in a mystery shop capacity, go through the actual processes as a new member would, and then feed back to the franchisee. So they're doing that kind of semi-regularly throughout the studios. But then if there's any other time where a franchisee actually reaches out to us, we'll actually send in a team to help them with whatever the problem is.
So, if you're not taking note, training and support you can't do enough of, and I think a number of the messages from some of the other discussions have emphasised that. I'm conscious of time. I've just been given the signal. So because this is about you guys learning, can I open this up to some questions from the floor, please?
Hi.
Hi, I used to run a franchising business for an American sports brand. And one of the things that I found that was very interesting is as the business grew, the demands of the licensee grew as they became smarter about their business. So we had to evolve the services and how we were supporting with them because they put pressure on our margins and the royalties that they were wanting to pay. So I would be interested in what your thoughts are and how you're dealing with this issue.
Shall I do this one? As a brand to remain fresh, you have to keep innovating, you have to keep changing, and that's part of the deal. So that's where we do have some pushback occasionally. So the way we operate is we have seasonal changes in menu. So that's what we sign up to, and the franchisees sign up to that. Sometimes the franchisees feel that the market or their local market isn't ready for what we're proposing, and that's where there can be some conflict. But we use all the data, the historic data, trends data to really work as collaboratively as possible. But ultimately, we've got to focus on doing what's best for the whole brand and the whole network. So there will be those conflicts, and it particularly depending on how innovative the franchisor is, how far they want to actually push it, and where the franchisee is, whether they actually want to go where the brand wants to go as well. It doesn't happen that often, but again, that all comes through, I think, with the due diligence, because the worst thing you can do is sign up as a franchisee for franchisor who's not innovating, who's not developing, and therefore you get left behind because the market is very dynamic, moves very quickly, but is getting the right balance that is comfortable for everybody.
I'll just add very quickly, it's actually, we've had some really good ideas that come from our franchisees, especially if they're in a different country, because the market, especially for fitness, is quite different, say in New York, and they've fed us back, our students want this, that and the other, and we've thought about it, and then together we've come up with a solution which has been very good for them. Might be slightly different to what we do here, but yeah, I think especially if it's a relationship you have with your franchisee, they want to feel heard, and so obviously it's more difficult when you've got hundreds of outlets, but I think when it's still reasonably small, it's more like a family, and some of the ideas that come through are great. Others are like, maybe we'll talk about that in a few months. Hope they forget. Yeah.
And Lawrence touched on this earlier, the Franchisee Advisory Council and getting franchisees involved in some of these decision-making processes. Again, it sounds trite, but actually their buy-in can be hugely influential, particularly if you want to introduce something that might be controversial or, dare I say, might involve an extra cost on behalf of the franchisee's perspective. If it can be championed by your franchisees rather than from corporate HQ, a much more powerful way of introducing a change in the business. I think you had your hand up. Yep.
Yes, so my question would be more for Michael and Michele. Because obviously the franchisee, would they hire their own instructor? I'm wondering, because the instructor is so important in your business because they represent the brand as much as it's the branding and the studio, the space, etc. But do you as HQ still kind of have an eye or a say on who's teaching the classes?
Can we take that?
Yes, I think the key to my business is I personally train every single one of the instructors. So my teacher training program, because I had 25 years in the yoga industry trying to work with other teachers that have been trained by someone else. And so I just needed to know exactly what they knew. I needed them to know what I want them to know. And so we train them all. And I would never send a teacher that wasn't really great to a new business. Sometimes they send us teachers that live nearby, say in another country, and we train them. But we would never give them to even in our own studios, they have to go through an internship program before we set them loose on the public.
You train the one from the other countries? I
train every single one, yes. I think it's really important, otherwise that's your product, that's your whole ethos, that's your safety knowledge and all the knowledge that I have over the last 40 years in health and fitness, that I want each teacher I want every student to have that experience, that really good experience.
Yeah, from an F45 perspective, I think that's a great question, and that's something that was addressed right at the start. I think, as I mentioned previously, the model was always to go large and many studios. So if you go into an F45 studio, the bulk of the training, as you would say, or moving around the room is actually done by TV screens that are on the wall. So every class and every studio around the world is doing the same class on every day. So if you're doing a Brixton class in Tuesday on London, you're doing that in Sydney, you're doing that in Singapore. And the idea is that the movements are all centralized, so we still control what movements are going on in classes. We're doing all the programming. Now, for the actual trainers, they have to do a day's induction, and they have to be level qualified as a PT before they can even apply. If they're qualified as a PT, we're not going to teach them how to squat. We're going to teach them how to manipulate people around the room and to use our system. So I guess slightly more of a mass market appeal.
I'm very sorry, but we have run out of time. Can I ask you all to put your hands together for my three panellists? Thank you very much.